Jake Morrison felt his world spin as the USS Horizon shook like a leaf in a storm, sparks flying from every control panel around him and the smell of burning metal filling the air that was getting thicker by the second, making it hard to breathe. As he fought to keep his ship from breaking apart completely, while emergency alarms screamed in his ears and red warning lights flashed across every surface he could see, telling him that multiple systems were failing at the same time and that he had maybe minutes before everything went dark forever. The former Navy SEAL turned space pilot had seen combat before on Earth, but nothing like this. Nothing that came from nowhere and hit so hard that his advanced reconnaissance vessel went from perfectly fine to completely destroyed in less than 30 seconds, and as he struggled with the controls that were barely responding to his touch anymore, he could see through the cracked view screen that he was falling toward a planet that looked like it was covered in strange geometric patterns that definitely were not natural formations. Jake had been investigating energy readings that Earth command could not explain, signals coming from this uncharted world that seemed too organized and too powerful to be anything natural. But now, as his ship fell like a rock toward the surface below, he realized that those energy signatures had been weapons, alien weapons that had been waiting for him to get close enough to destroy his ship without any warning at all. The crash came faster than he expected and harder than anything he had ever experienced, throwing him against his restraints so violently that he felt his ribs crack and his vision go black for several seconds, while his ship carved a long scar across what looked like metal ground, sending pieces of hull flying in every direction until finally everything stopped moving and the only sound was the hiss of escaping air and the crackle of small fires throughout the wreckage. When Jake finally managed to unbuckle himself and crawl out of what was left of his pilot's seat, he found that his ship had crashed right in the middle of something that looked like a massive military base, with towers and buildings that were clearly not human in design, stretching out in every direction as far as he could see. All of them, made from materials that seemed to shift color in the alien sunlight and covered with symbols that meant nothing to him, but looked very much like military markings. He grabbed his emergency kit and his sidearm from the wreckage, checking quickly to make sure he was not badly injured before moving away from his destroyed ship as fast as he could, knowing that whatever had shot him down would probably be coming to investigate the crash site very soon, and he needed to find somewhere to hide before they arrived to finish what they had started. The gravity on this world felt almost exactly like Earth, which was lucky, but the air tasted strange and metallic, though his scanner said it was safe to breathe. And as he moved through what looked like vehicle storage areas, filled with machines that were definitely not human in origin, he began to understand that he had crashed into something much bigger and more dangerous than just a weapons platform. Jake found cover behind a structure that looked like it might be a fuel depot and used his military training to observe the base around him, counting buildings and trying to figure out how many enemies he might be facing. And what he saw made his blood run cold, because this was not just a small outpost or research station, but a full military installation that could house thousands of soldiers. The first aliens he saw were walking patrol routes between the buildings, and they looked like nothing he had ever imagined. Some tall and thin with too many arms, others short and covered in what looked like natural armor, and still others that seemed to float above the ground instead of walking. But all of them carried weapons that glowed with the same energy he had seen destroy his ship. Jake used his combat experience to stay hidden while he watched the patrol patterns, counting at least 12 different types of aliens working together, in what was clearly a well-organized military operation. And from the intercepted radio chatter he could pick up with his emergency equipment, he began to piece together something that made his situation much worse than just being stranded on an alien world. The signals his equipment could decode were talking about Earth, about human weaknesses and invasion plans, about how easy it would be to conquer his home world because humans were primitive and unprepared for real warfare, and Jake realized that his reconnaissance mission had accidentally discovered the staging area for an attack on Earth that was supposed to begin in just 3 days. He counted patrol groups and estimated guard rotations, using skills learned in Special Forces training to build a picture of the enemy force. And his count kept getting higher and higher until he realized he was looking at approximately 1,000 alien soldiers from multiple species, all of them preparing to attack his home world while assuming that no human would ever be able to find them or stop them. Jake Morrison had crashed into the middle of an alien invasion force that outnumbered him 1,000 to 1, with no way to call for help and no way to escape. But as he crouched behind alien machinery and watched his enemies prepare to destroy everything he cared about, the former SEAL began to smile because these aliens had made one very big mistake when they decided to underestimate what one determined human could do when he had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Jake spent the next 6 hours moving like a ghost through the alien base, using every skill he had learned in Special Forces training to stay hidden while he studied his enemies and learned their weaknesses, because he knew that understanding them was the only way he could hope to survive long enough to stop their invasion of Earth. And what he discovered made him realize that these aliens were both more dangerous and more vulnerable than he had first thought. The insect-like creatures, called Krathari, moved in perfect groups of 6, never breaking formation and always communicating through clicking sounds that seemed to coordinate their actions like a hive mind, making them incredibly effective at working together, but also predictable in their movements, since they always followed the same patterns and never seemed to think as individuals who could adapt to unexpected situations. The reptilian Vexans were bigger and stronger than humans, with thick armor-like skin and claws that could tear through metal. But Jake noticed they moved slowly and seemed to rely on their natural weapons instead of learning to use their energy rifles properly, holding them like clubs instead of precision instruments, which told him they were probably used to winning fights through raw strength rather than skill or tactics. The strangest aliens were the Nethas, who looked almost like floating jellyfish made of energy that could pass through solid walls and appeared to be in charge of operating the base's most advanced technology. But Jake observed that they became sluggish and dim when the temperature dropped, and they seemed to avoid areas where the base's cooling systems were working hardest, suggesting they had a weakness he might be able to exploit as Jake watched. And learned, he began to understand that while each alien species was dangerous in its own way, they were all working together in ways that seemed forced and unnatural, like they were following orders from higher commanders rather than fighting as a unified army that trusted each other completely, and he could see small signs of tension between different species that suggested their alliance might not be as strong as it appeared. The base itself was a marvel of alien engineering with power systems Jake could barely understand, and weapons that could destroy his entire home planet. But as he studied the technology more closely, he realized that everything was designed around centralized control systems that required constant communication between different parts of the base, which meant that if he could disrupt those communications, he might be able to cause serious problems for the alien forces. Jake found that the aliens had been studying Earth for months through long-range sensors and spy probes, and their intelligence reports painted humans as a primitive species that would be easy to conquer because they fought with simple weapons and had no experience with real warfare against advanced civilizations. But these reports were based on observations of civilian populations and regular military forces, not special operations soldiers who were trained to fight against impossible odds. The more Jake learned about their invasion plans, the more he realized how devastating their attack would be for Earth. Because they intended to strike at major population centers simultaneously while using orbital weapons to destroy any military resistance before humans could organize an effective defense. And their timeline showed they planned to complete the conquest of Earth in less than 2 weeks after their initial assault began. But Jake also discovered that the alien commanders were so confident in their superiority that they had not prepared for any real resistance from humans, and their tactical plans assumed that Earth's forces would either surrender quickly or be destroyed easily, which meant they were not ready to face the kind of asymmetric warfare that Special Forces soldiers specialized in, especially psychological. Operations designed to create fear and confusion among enemy forces. The base's communication system was incredibly sophisticated, connecting not just the different areas of the installation, but also maintaining contact with the invasion fleet that was already on its way to Earth, and Jake realized that if he could access those communications, he might be able to gather intelligence about the fleet's size and capabilities while also potentially disrupting their coordination with the ground forces. During his reconnaissance, Jake also discovered that the alien forces stored their weapons and equipment in centralized armories that were guarded but not as heavily protected as the command centers, and many of their advanced weapon systems had manual overrides that could be activated by anyone who understood the basic operating principles, which meant he might be able to turn their own technology against them if he was careful and smart about how he approached the problem. The most important thing Jake learned during his long day of observation was that despite their advanced technology and superior numbers, these aliens had never faced an enemy like him. Someone who could think creatively and adapt quickly to changing circumstances, someone who was willing to take risks that their logical military minds would never consider, and someone who understood that sometimes the best way to win a fight was not to play by the same rules as your enemies. As night fell on the alien world, and the base's lighting systems dimmed to simulate the day and night cycles that most of the alien species seemed to need, Jake found a secure hiding place in an unused storage area and began planning his campaign against the 1,000 enemies who thought they were safe from any human threat, knowing that he had perhaps 48 hours before their invasion fleet would launch toward Earth and begin the destruction of everything he had sworn to protect. Jake began his war against the alien base not with explosions or direct attacks, but with something much more subtle and dangerous, using the psychological warfare techniques he had learned in Special Forces training to plant seeds of doubt and suspicion among the enemy forces. Because he knew that fear and paranoia could be more destructive than any weapon when used properly against enemies who were not expecting to face that kind of threat. His first target was the communication system that connected different parts of the base, and using equipment salvaged from his crashed ship along with alien technology he had quietly stolen during his reconnaissance, Jake managed to tap into their secure channels and begin intercepting messages between patrol groups and command centers, learning their codes and procedures while preparing to use their own communication network against them. The aliens used complex frequency patterns to prevent their enemies from listening to their conversations, but they had never encountered human electronic warfare capabilities, and Jake was able to modify his equipment to not just listen to their communications, but also to inject his own messages into their network, making it appear that the false information was coming from legitimate sources within their own command structure. Jake started small, sending slightly modified patrol orders that would cause different alien groups to arrive at the same checkpoint at the same time, creating confusion and minor conflicts when units that were supposed to be in different areas suddenly found themselves competing for the same space. And while these incidents seemed like simple scheduling errors, they began to create a pattern of small problems that made the alien commanders question the efficiency of their communication system. As the alien forces began to experience these minor coordination problems, Jake escalated his psychological campaign by intercepting casualty reports from patrol units and altering them before they reached the command center, changing the numbers and descriptions to make it appear that different alien species were suffering different rates of losses, which began to create suspicion about whether some species were deliberately avoiding dangerous assignments, while others were bearing more than their fair share of the risks. The Krathari, with their hive mind mentality, were particularly susceptible to this kind of manipulation because they naturally assumed that any species that was not suffering equal losses must be withholding effort from the group. And Jake exploited this by making it appear that the Vexans were taking fewer risks during patrol duties, which caused the insect-like aliens to begin questioning their reptilian allies about their commitment to the mission. Jake also discovered that the aliens had natural rivalries and territorial disputes that went back generations, particularly between the Krathari and Vexans, who had fought wars against each other before joining the collective. And he began to exploit these old tensions by creating incidents that could be interpreted as deliberate provocations, such as changing guard schedules so that Vexan patrols would accidentally enter areas that the Krathari considered their responsibility. The most effective part of Jake's psychological campaign was his ability to make each species believe that the others were plotting against them. And he did this by creating fake intelligence reports that suggested various alien groups were communicating secretly with enemies of the collective, using the aliens' own paranoia about betrayal and rebellion to turn them against each other, without them ever realizing that the real threat was coming from a single human who was manipulating their fears. When tensions between different alien species began to rise, Jake started targeting individual soldiers rather than just communication systems, using his stealth training to eliminate isolated sentries in ways that made their deaths look like they had been killed by weapons used by other alien species, and he was careful to leave evidence that would point suspicion toward internal conflicts rather than external threats. The first alien Jake killed was a Krathari scout who was patrolling alone near the base's perimeter, and Jake used a Vexan energy weapon he had stolen to make the kill, then arranged the scene to make it look like the insect had been attacked during a territorial dispute, knowing that when the body was discovered, the Krathari would assume they were being targeted by their reptilian allies. Jake repeated this tactic over the next several days, killing aliens from different species using weapons that belonged to other groups, and each death increased the suspicion and fear among the alien forces, who began to believe that their alliance was breaking down and that different species were starting to eliminate their rivals in preparation for taking control of the invasion force. The alien commanders tried to investigate these incidents, but their rigid military thinking prevented them from considering that a single enemy could be responsible for the growing chaos, and instead they focused on internal security measures designed to prevent their own forces from fighting each other, which only increased the paranoia and made cooperation between different species even more difficult. As the base descended into suspicion and mistrust, Jake observed that patrol patterns became more erratic as different species tried to avoid contact with each other. Guard rotations were changed frequently as commanders tried to prevent conspiracies from forming, and communication between different parts of the base decreased significantly as each group became more secretive about their activities and less willing to share information. The psychological pressure Jake was creating began to affect the aliens. Combat effectiveness as soldiers spent more time watching their supposed allies than watching for external threats, and the unity that had made the collective dangerous began to crack under the weight of fear and suspicion that Jake was deliberately feeding through his campaign of deception and misdirection. Jake escalated his campaign against the alien base by targeting the infrastructure that kept the different species comfortable and functional, knowing that resource scarcity would force them to compete with each other and make their growing mistrust. Even worse, because hungry and uncomfortable soldiers were much more likely to turn on their allies than well-fed troops who had everything they needed to focus on their mission. His first target was the atmospheric processing system that provided breathable air for the different alien species, each of which required slightly different gas mixtures to remain at peak efficiency. And Jake used his growing understanding of their technology to contaminate the Krathari air processors with a chemical compound that would not kill them, but would make them sluggish and irritable, forcing them to use backup systems that produced air that was barely adequate for the other species. The result was exactly what Jake had hoped for. As the Krathari began to suffer from reduced coordination and increased aggression, while the other alien species found their own air quality degraded when the insect-like creatures switched to backup processors, creating a situation where everyone was breathing worse air and blaming each other for the problems that seemed to have no clear technical cause. Jake also targeted the food production systems that created meals for the different alien species, focusing particularly on the protein synthesizers that produced the meat-like substances that the carnivorous Vexans required for proper nutrition. and he carefully sabotaged these machines in ways that would reduce their output by nearly half, while making the remaining food taste terrible and difficult to digest at the same time. Jake made sure that the plant-based food systems used by the herbivorous Zolani continued to work perfectly, providing them with plenty of their preferred nutrients while their carnivorous allies went hungry. And this disparity created exactly the kind of resentment and suspicion that Jake wanted to encourage as the alien alliance began to fracture under the pressure of artificial scarcity. The most devastating attack Jake launched against the base's infrastructure was his assault on their central communication hub, which he accessed during a shift change when the facility was briefly unmanned, and using his combined knowledge of human electronics and alien technology, he managed to plant a virus in their communication system that would randomly alter messages. In subtle but important ways, the virus Jake created was designed to introduce small errors into orders and reports, changing numbers and locations just enough to cause confusion without being obvious enough to be detected immediately. And these alterations began to create a cascade of problems as units received contradictory instructions and commanders found their reports being questioned by superiors who were seeing different information than what had actually been sent, as the communication system became increasingly unreliable. Jake took advantage of the chaos to send completely false orders that appeared to come from the highest levels of command, instructing different alien species to arrest members of other species for suspected treason and sabotage. And these orders seemed credible because they came through official channels at a time when everyone was already suspicious of their allies. The first major confrontation occurred when a squad of Vexan soldiers attempted to arrest a group of Krathari technicians, based on Jake's false orders, and the insect-like aliens resisted what they saw as an unprovoked attack, leading to a firefight that left several aliens dead and convinced both species that the other was actively working to undermine the mission. Jake watched from hiding as the base erupted into open conflict between former allies, with different species barricading themselves in separate areas and treating other groups as potential enemies rather than trusted partners, and he realized that his psychological warfare campaign had succeeded beyond his wildest expectations, in destroying the unity that had made the alien collective so dangerous. During this chaos, Jake began systematically eliminating key personnel who were trying to restore order and communication between the different species, targeting translators, who could help the aliens overcome language barriers, technicians who understood how to repair the communication systems, and officers who had enough authority to countermand the false orders that were causing so much confusion. Each elimination was carried out in a way that appeared to be the result of the ongoing conflicts between alien species, with Jake using weapons and techniques that would implicate different groups in the killings, and he was careful to ensure that the most competent and level-headed aliens were the ones who disappeared, leaving behind only the most paranoid and aggressive individuals to lead their respective factions. The alien commander, General Thrax, attempted to restore order by declaring martial law within the base and establishing strict protocols for interaction between different species. But these measures only served to increase tensions, as each group interpreted the restrictions as evidence that they were being specifically targeted for persecution by the others. Jake observed that the alien forces were now spending more time and energy watching each other than preparing for their invasion of Earth, with guard duties being doubled, not to watch for external threats, but to prevent their supposed allies from launching surprise attacks, and weapon shipments being delayed because no species trusted the others to handle powerful equipment responsibly. The breakdown in cooperation was so complete that routine maintenance on critical systems began to fail as different species refused to work together on tasks that required coordination between multiple groups. And Jake realized that the alien base was beginning to consume itself from within as fear and suspicion replaced the discipline and unity that had made it such a formidable threat to Earth. Jake decided it was time to reveal himself to the remaining aliens, but not in the way they expected, because he wanted them to understand exactly what had been happening to them and who was responsible for the destruction of their mighty invasion force. And he knew that the psychological impact of learning that a single human had been systematically dismantling their operation would be more devastating than any direct military assault. Instead of continuing to hide in the shadows, Jake began leaving. Unmistakable evidence of human presence throughout the base, starting with boot prints in strategic locations where the aliens would be sure to find them. And these prints were clearly different from any alien footwear and could only have been made by someone wearing human-designed boots. Jake also carved human symbols and letters into alien equipment using tools he had improvised from salvaged materials, leaving messages in English that the aliens could not read but would recognize as being from an intelligence that was definitely not part of their collective. And these symbols appeared in places where only someone with extensive knowledge of the base layout and security systems could have gained access. The most dramatic revelation came when Jake left a recording device in the main corridor where it would be discovered by the next patrol. And on this device, he had recorded a message in clear English explaining exactly what he had been doing to the alien forces over the past several days, detailing how he had manipulated their communications, sabotaged their equipment, and turned them against each other when the aliens played back Jake's recording and ran it through their translation systems. They learned that a single human soldier had been responsible for every mysterious incident that had plagued their base, from the communication failures to the equipment malfunctions to the deaths that had sparked conflicts between different species. And this revelation sent shockwaves through the remaining alien forces. The discovery that one human had been living among them undetected for days while systematically destroying their operation was something that contradicted everything the aliens believed about human capabilities, and it forced them to confront the possibility that their intelligence about Earth's military forces was completely wrong and that humans were far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. General Thrax attempted to rally the surviving aliens by arguing that they should unite against this common threat. But the damage to trust and morale was too severe to be easily repaired, and many of the alien soldiers were now more afraid of the invisible human enemy than they were motivated to continue with their invasion plans. Jake used the aliens' new awareness of his presence to his psychological advantage, employing tactics designed to prey on their fear of an enemy they could not predict or understand. And he began hunting small groups of aliens in ways that showcased human persistence and adaptability, while demonstrating that their advanced technology could not protect them from a determined opponent. Where the aliens expected Jake to attack from hiding places and ambush positions, he approached them openly across clear ground, using human tactics that made no sense according to alien military doctrine, but which proved devastatingly effective because the aliens had no experience defending against such unconventional approaches. Where the aliens expected frontal assaults, with overwhelming firepower, Jake disappeared like a ghost, only to reappear somewhere completely unexpected. And this unpredictability became his greatest weapon, as the alien forces found themselves unable to anticipate or counter his movements. Jake turned the aliens' own advanced weapons and technology against them by reprogramming their automated defense systems to target them instead of protecting them. And he used their own communication networks to spread false information and contradictory orders that kept them confused and divided. Even as they tried to coordinate a response to his attacks, the aliens discovered that their sophisticated sensors and detection equipment were useless against someone who understood how the technology worked and could find ways to defeat or avoid it. And Jake's apparent immunity to their surveillance systems made him seem almost supernatural to enemies who had always relied on technological superiority to win their battles. Most terrifying to the aliens was Jake's complete lack of fear in the face of overwhelming odds, because where they expected him to retreat or surrender when faced with superior numbers and firepower, he continued to press his attacks with a relentless determination that was completely foreign to their understanding of rational behavior. The alien concept of tactical withdrawal and strategic retreat was based on mathematical calculations of odds and probabilities. But Jake's willingness to fight against impossible odds without any apparent hope of personal survival made no sense to minds that prioritized individual preservation over mission accomplishment. As Jake continued his campaign against the increasingly demoralized alien forces, he made sure that each encounter demonstrated some aspect of human capability that contradicted their preconceptions, showing them that humans could adapt quickly to new situations, improvise solutions to unexpected problems, and maintain fighting effectiveness even under extreme stress and disadvantage. The aliens began to realize that their entire invasion plan was based on fundamentally flawed assumptions about human nature and capabilities, and this understanding filled them with a fear they had never experienced before. The fear of an enemy that could not be understood or defeated using conventional military thinking. Jake's psychological warfare reached its peak when he began leaving dead aliens arranged in ways that sent clear messages to the survivors. Not just that he was hunting them, but that he was enjoying the hunt, and that their technological advantages meant nothing against his superior understanding of warfare and human determination. The final confrontation began when fewer than 50 aliens remained alive out of the original 1,000, and these survivors had barricaded themselves in the base's central command center with General Thrax, desperately trying to send a warning message to their invasion fleet about the true nature of the human threat they had discovered. But Jake's earlier sabotage of the communication systems meant that any message they managed to transmit would be incomplete and probably not believed by commanders who still thought humans were primitive and harmless. Jake approached the command center not with stealth or deception, but with the direct assault tactics that had made human soldiers legendary throughout Earth's military history, and he carried weapons he had improvised from alien technology combined with human engineering principles, creating hybrid devices that were more effective than anything either species had designed alone. The aliens had spent days preparing defensive positions around the command center, using their advanced technology to create barriers and weapon emplacements that should have been able to stop any reasonable attack. But Jake's assault demonstrated the fundamental problem with fighting humans, which was that humans were rarely reasonable when they were determined to accomplish a mission. Jake began his attack by using alien explosives he had modified with timer systems built from parts of his crashed ship, and these devices were placed in locations that the aliens had not thought to defend because no rational enemy would have been able to reach those positions without being detected. But Jake had spent days learning every hidden passage and maintenance tunnel in the base. The explosions that marked the beginning of the final battle were carefully timed to create maximum confusion while also disabling the command center's most powerful defensive systems, and in the chaos that followed, Jake moved through the alien positions like a force of nature, using tactics that combined human unpredictability with alien weapons technology. The surviving aliens fought bravely, but they were facing an enemy who had already proven that their technology and numbers meant nothing against human determination, and Jake's assault showcased everything that made humans formidable opponents in ways that completely overwhelmed the alien defenders. Jake used improvised weapons that the aliens could not have anticipated, including devices that turned their own energy systems against them and traps that exploited their reliance on technological solutions to tactical problems. And each innovation demonstrated human creativity and adaptability in ways that the aliens found impossible to counter. The battle was not won through superior firepower or advanced technology, but through Jake's willingness to take risks that no alien military doctrine would have considered acceptable, including direct charges against fortified positions and close-quarters combat that negated the aliens' advantages in ranged weapons. General Thrax made a final desperate attempt to rally his remaining forces by appealing to their species' pride and their duty to the collective. But the alien soldiers had been so thoroughly demoralized by days of psychological warfare and the revelation of human capabilities that they could barely function as a coordinated fighting force. Jake's assault on the command center's inner defenses was relentless and methodical as he systematically eliminated alien positions while advancing toward the central communication array that was still attempting to send warning messages to the invasion fleet. And his approach combined the tactical precision of Special Forces training with the improvised brutality of desperate combat. The final moments of the battle came when Jake reached the quantum communicator that connected the base to the invasion fleet, and instead of simply destroying the device, he used his understanding of both human and alien technology to send his own message to the fleet. A recording that would give the alien commanders their first real understanding of what they would be facing when they reached Earth. Jake's message to the invasion fleet was simple and direct, explaining that their advance force had been completely destroyed by a single human soldier, and that Earth was defended by millions of fighters who were just as capable and determined as he was. And this message would reach the fleet with all the authority of the base's official communication systems. In the end, Jake stood alone among the wreckage of the alien command center, surrounded by the bodies of enemies who had underestimated human capabilities until it was too late to save themselves. And he realized that his victory was not just tactical, but symbolic of what would happen when the galaxy's established powers tried to conquer humanity. Jake activated an emergency beacon, using alien technology he had modified for human use. And as he waited for rescue, he reflected on what this encounter meant for humanity's future among the stars, knowing that the invasion fleet might still come, but they would be facing a species they no longer understood and could never again underestimate. The rescue came 3 days later when Earth ships following Jake's beacon arrived to find him the sole survivor of what could only be described as the first human victory in interstellar warfare. And his debriefing would become the foundation for humanity's military doctrine for galactic conflict. Jake's story spread throughout human space as proof that no matter how advanced or numerous their enemies might be, human determination and adaptability were weapons that no alien technology could defend against, and the galaxy would learn that underestimating humanity was the most dangerous mistake any species could make.